Without love, it doesn't matter. You can give more. But the motive is not love. Then you are just wasting time.
When did black tax emerge? And what makes it tax in our generation that didn't make it tax in our parents' generation?
Do you have money every month that is placed for helping?
One of the driving factors to greed is this desire to be independent. And sometimes our independence is seeking independence of God.
The average household income in this country is 149,000 rand. Which means technically at 149,000 rand, you're rich.
If I sense that you think you giving me money means somehow you are better than me, it will always be a no.
Hello, everybody. We are back with season 2 of our Every Nation Bryanston podcast. And this one is entitled South African Idols. If you are joining us for the first time this week, you have missed episode 1 and 2, in which we covered pride and gluttony. You definitely want to make sure that you see those as well. So as we embark on the third one today, we will be covering greed.
Yes.
And I am joined today by 2 gentlemen who will be helping us go through our voyage through greed. And I'm sure number 1 is no strange face to the people of this podcast, and that is our fearless leader, Sip. And we are also
Never been called that.
Joined by Mandilake, who is going to join us in this discussion and hopefully hold us accountable on many fronts. You'll find out soon why.
It's going to be great.
That's for sure.
So this is where we're at, and this is where our conversation is for today. If you caught last week's podcast on gluttony, we started with a couple of stats, and I thought it would be helpful for us, just as we dive into this conversation, to have a couple of stats just as background information, or maybe just as context, as to why greed is so relevant as a South African idol, and why it makes sense for us to have this conversation, or why we as South Africans potentially should really lead this conversation. It should be no surprise that we are the most unequal society in the world. Our Gini coefficient is currently sitting at about 0.66, 0.67, depending on which economist you choose to believe. And here are some interesting statistics about our country. 3.2 million people in South Africa live in extreme poverty, which is unusual given the fact that there are 64 million people in the population overall. Okay. We also know that 140,000 people have been pushed below the poverty line almost every year since 2023. And what's interesting is that we would consider sort of our domestic poverty line to be sitting at about 1,200 rand. Does that sound like a lot of money, Sip? Not so much, right? I think we will hear a little bit from Mandilake later about some of his perceptions and experiences having worked at the receiver or having worked at SARS. But what I thought was interesting was some of the tax data, right? And that's that 28 million South Africans depend on social grants, right? So that includes your unemployment basic subsistence grants, your old age grants, the child grants, but that's 28 million people. That's about 45% exactly of the population that's surviving on grants. And then only 7.4 million people pay income tax.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
That's a quarter of the people that are on grants that are paying income tax.
Wow.
And then we have about 6.8 million people who are not even eligible to pay income tax. So they work, but they can't be taxed because their income is below the threshold for income tax. Here's where it starts getting fun. If it wasn't already, right? So if we then consider what we're looking at in terms of the 7.4 million people, about 978,000 people, so less than a million people, that's 1.5% of the population, pay 61% of all personal income tax in this country, right? So if you are sitting in that roughly 1 million people. Thank you. A very big thank you to you, because you are carrying us by carrying almost 2/3 of the taxes. And then apparently there are 200,000 people or 197,000 people in South Africa that earn over 1.5 million rand. And those South Africans are paying 32% of the personal income revenue. So, in the context of where we're going, I hope that the picture that we've painted about the South Africa we live in and the country we've grown up in and the nature of our society and how endemic inequality is allows us to then think about how very unique the South African experience of inequality makes the conversation of greed for us, and all of kind of the places in our studio that it touches, given the fact that all of us find ourselves somewhere in the statistic, right? All of us are somewhere in the statistics that I've provided. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there because I've been speaking a lot and I've given a lot of data, but just some initial thoughts, right? I mean, I know we know that our society is unequal, but what is it, how does it land when we are looking at the cold hard data?
So first of all, I'm going to ask Mandilake to respond, but this is exactly why I wanted to do this podcast. I think I'm looking forward maybe to going through a few scriptures.
Yep.
But there's certain things that you're saying I'm hearing for the first time, and I am willing to bet a whole bunch of other people are hearing for the first time. And partly it's because our worlds are exactly that. Our world. We see everything through Civ and what Civ earns and what Civ does and what Civ wants. To actually pause for a moment and realize that at the core of the greater culture, there is a socializing and normalizing of greed that we're born into, we're used to, we are actively involved in, even though we might not call it greed. I mean, tell me the last time you went to church or had a connect group and someone was like, champion, greed is a major issue in my life.
Ever.
Yeah.
No, you don't know anybody who does that, but you listen to what you just said and you go, wow, this is a part of us and maybe plays out in different ways. So I actually have more questions for you guys today, but Mandilake, what are your thoughts on this? And are you paying tax? What are you doing there?
Good question.
Are you in the 200,000 people that literally
What
have
are you
us
doing
on their
here?
backs?
With this trench coat, are you paying tax?
This, right, is a tax deduction. Yeah, I think this is very interesting. It's mostly the stats that you've shared, Mandisa. Thanks a lot for that. You look at this in two ways. It's mostly as a believer. There's a kingdom perception, and there's the worldly perception. For a lot of people, they would feel justified if they are on the good side of inequality to fight for this thing to continue, because any minute it could be them. If things look the way they do, if you're saying there's so few people, I mean, if you are earning 1.5 million at this point and you are part of the 200,000, of course, I'm thinking of even more stats now, because of this is on the worldly system side of things. Because in South Africa, 38.5% of, when you're looking at the contributors of the categories in taxes, is coming from personal income tax. So that's 38.5%.
Yep.
Then 28, 24, 28, it's around that. It's VAT, right?
Right.
Then right after that, which is about 18%, is coming from corporate income tax.
Is that justice, though? Like, is that? I mean, nobody has to answer this because we're on camera, but I just feel like we should ask the question: is that justice?
And that's where I'm getting to, because and we're purely looking. We're going to get to the word. We're purely looking at the South African system, tax system.
Wow.
And when I said the system is there for us to work the system, it's because you need to understand why could so big a companies only contribute almost half what individuals do in such a harsh economy.
Yeah.
with the inflation, for sure, we're trying to we're trying to raise VAT. We didn't succeed. We're trying to raise fuel levy now. I'm not sure we're contesting that. However, all of these are aimed at the final or at the end user of all these things.
Yeah.
This then tells you that there is a depreciation or loss of value in the money that gets in the hands of the consumer, which is me and you. So I'm just talking to the aspect now of individuals that are in the good side, seeing these things that are negatively affecting what they are making now. Because remember, this is not guaranteed. It's mostly with the economy of South Africa.
Yeah.
Then people would push to keep things as they are, though they know that this is not right. So we're going to the greed aspect. To the person who is disadvantaged, it looks bad because they're thinking you have more rooms in your house than you have people staying in it.
Come on now.
I'm struggling with the place I stay in. We are 5 in a 2-bedroom house.
Yeah.
10 in some instances. And the question is that fair? And now we just looking and just stop me so that I don't talk too long.
You're throwing serious punches now.
Yeah, you're doing well.
But I'm trying to get to the fact that the guy who is in the top end, who's making more money, is saying, I worked my way through this.
Yes.
I understand how the tax system works because the government favors people who assist it to achieve its mandate.
Yes.
The companies are helping people get employment. It's a government mandate to get employment. If you're in property, you are helping the government house people. It's a government mandate. Those people have more deductions than the guy who's working for themselves.
Sure.
There are less deductions in the tax systems for individuals than there are for companies. Hence the contrast of half the tax coming from companies than what is coming from individuals.
This is incredible because it reminds me of something that I read in Killjoys, which is
John Piper.
John Piper, right? And so the opening of the section that's specifically on greed makes reference to greed as the hobgoblin of capitalism, the vice that moves the invisible hand of the market. And I think for me, when we have all of this data and we have all of the numbers in front of us, it really begs the question, is the system just bigger than us?
Sure.
Did we just fall into this thing? And what do we do? Like, what is our agency propel us to do as believers, but also as participants in the system who happen to be taxed, who happen to be earners, who happen to be employees, who happen to be living very real lives in very real economies?
So, again, I'm going to pose some questions to you guys because I number one, I've been on so many podcasts with you and you've never looked so sober in your life. This is the most sober I've ever seen you. And by that, I mean like you are, calm and borderline deep in thought. Normally you're quite relaxed. So I'm actually interested to know why this particular topic is hitting you the way it's hitting you. And why it's so close to you. But there's tensions for me. So on one hand, I'm going, all right, can someone help me understand the tension between a company's incentive to continue trading in our context and a corrupt state that is a real issue in our context as we are talking about these numbers? Because, again, when we look around the room, these are 3 black folk. You almost feel like you want another white person because the only white person we have is behind the camera. His name is Armand. He's a French guy from Paris, right? But and I think for me, it would help our backgrounds coming from different backgrounds, but our faiths allowing us to actually speak from a core place. Because I think of the corruption, I think of incentives, and I go, okay, so where is the line? Some people's argument is, because you brought up the big hectic word capitalism, Some have argued, is it biblical, is it not? And can you even vie for a biblical financial system?
Yeah.
Is there such a thing, especially when you're dealing with a democracy, not a theocracy? Is there such a thing as this financial structure is more biblical than the other? But then aren't all financial structures able to be exploited? And maybe we're just doing a good job at exploiting this one. So I'm throwing it at you. You highly paid, highly academic, highly educated folks. Let me just sit back in my very poor jacket that I got for cheap. I got for free. I didn't even buy it.
Wow.
Explain yourselves, rich people.
This is absolutely wild. All I'm going to say is, I think to start unpacking this question is that we actually have to go to the core of the definition of what is greed, right? Particularly in the biblical context, before we then start thinking about, because maybe let me rewind and say what we don't want you to hear us say is that this conversation is about money, right?
Yeah, good.
This conversation is 100% about greed. And interestingly enough, what we discover as we go through the studies and we go through some of the readings is that in the same way that the common manifestation of gluttony is food, the common manifestation of greed is money.
Well put.
And all possessions that can be acquired with money, right?
Well said.
So at the heart of it, this is a discussion about greed that allows us or that causes us to have discussions related to and surrounded by money and the financial system and capitalism and all of these good things, right?
Can I just add a definition? The core output is actually not money. It's treasure, according to the Bible, according to the scriptures. Right. That's the core output of this discussion. Yeah, you're right.
And so when we have this conversation, it's also difficult to have it without excess, right? Or the role that excess plays in that, in treasure and our perception of what our treasure is. So as soon as we have this desire or this perception that our treasure is anything other than God, we have now ventured into the murky waters of greed. Anytime that desire is greater than, or the desire that we have for the acquisition of security that comes from anything outside of God, we're dealing with an issue of greed. And I think the interesting thing for me is that this is not limited to wealthy people. Often when we have conversations around greed, we think, oh, rich people, this about, you better start, you better think about answering these questions, This is for the 200,000 of you that are, in the 45th percentile tax bracket, or
it's
this
not a class
conversation,
thing, it's not a race thing.
It's for working people, it's for this type of people, it's a racial, it's not any of those things. It's a heart condition question when we talk about greed, and what the inordinate desire of our hearts, or what the imbalance is in the loves of our hearts that are leading us in a particular direction. And so the markets have this tendency of having a voracious, uncontrolled appetite. And because there is no reverence in that particular context, I don't think that we should be surprised by the fact that the markets are purely driven by those desires. I think unfettered, uncontrolled appetites, particularly driven by humans and people inside those institutions, when we are left unbridled and uncontrolled and don't have to abide by a set of guidelines or criteria, we will do the most.
Chaos.
And this is a perfect example. The financial system the world over at the moment is doing the most. There is absolutely no reason why in a world with so many resources, there are people that continue to live hungry. When there is so much food and there are so many avenues through which resources could be redistributed, there are just people that continue to go without. So for me, the conversation around greed and whether or not the markets can be saved is actually a human condition question. And so the burden on us is, how do we live different? Right, in a society that is modeled by, or in a society that continues to live uninhibited and with unrestrained, sort of uncontained.
Yes.
How do we show up in a way that reveals that our system, our kingdom, our principles are different?
Yeah.
I'm liking this version of you. All right.
If I may take a step, actually, you're bringing about quite important factors as well with respect to, we're talking about greed resulting in, or speaking of treasures as well. And I mean, I think we will definitely have to touch on the fact that there's nothing wrong with abundance.
Yes.
Because God wants us to have abundance and treasures as well. It's how we go about getting those treasures. And I think you've said something quite key, because I think if the treasures take the place of God, they become first, I'll suppose, because they become our biggest thing. Jesus says, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all these things. But then I think due to, again, it could be markets, it could be South African circumstances, we could pursue treasures so as to be self-sustaining. Because I think one of the driving factors to greed is this desire to be independent. And sometimes our independence is seeking independence of God.
Good.
Well said.
Because I want to get to the point where I no longer have to pray. I'm not sure if you've ever been there.
No, absolutely.
We pray
I
too
feel
much.
what you're saying
I just want to gather enough money.
Yeah. I want to pray about other things. Sure, ne? Like world peace and stuff. I don't want to pray about, Lord, is there money at the end of the month? Yeah.
I don't want to be that person that's like so dependent, right? That I have to make decisions about my life
Exactly.
in such a way that I now can't think of anything else other than where my next is coming from.
Correct. And disregarding however we going about getting these treasures, because I think the Bible alludes to the fact that we are so obsessed with attaining these things to such an extent, it doesn't matter how it affects my neighbor, as long as I get that.
Yeah, well said. Well said. So, I mean, we've been using the word treasure quite a bit, and I want both of you to know I haven't forgotten my questions. But Matthew 6:19, let's go all the way to 24. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, okay, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now it goes on later on to speak about the eye as a lamp of the body, but also it speaks about you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve mammon and God. So here's what I found interesting is this text doesn't seem to have an issue with treasure. But it seems to say that treasure doesn't follow the heart, but the heart fundamentally follows the treasure.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? And I mean, we live in a very follow your heart kind of thing, not understanding that our heart is following something already. And if that thing is the wrong treasure, follow your heart is terrible advice.
The
right?
worst.
Especially if you are either naive or ignorant or deliberately blind to the treasures that are actually in your heart or your heart follows. And so I found that that interesting in that it actually points us to a heavenly treasure that you must save up, you must put up, you must have something that's heavenly. So then for me it goes to the idea that, you know, in an environment where we might believe that God wants abundance for us, there could be the possibility that you might not have abundance here. Okay, let me say it this way. Because I think so many times in our attempt to understand how God blesses us, we assume that it's only blessing that can be on earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I want the blessing on earth because I don't want to have every month be praying for bread. But I think there seems to be a bigger picture around treasure that God gives us that is more heavenward and more eternal, not to condone any struggle here, but for both the poor and the rich person to have something of upward call.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially in a society that believed that to do well meant that you are good.
Yeah.
This was this society. If you were rich, it was assumed that you were righteous.
Sure.
Yeah.
If you were righteous, it was assumed that you're going to be rich.
Yeah.
Right? And now here's the world we live in where righteous people are looking at the wicked with envy because the wicked are thriving and it seems like God is favoring them instead of them. So anyway, those are my thoughts from Matthew 6. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts.
I mean, for me, it's an interesting one, right? Because you have Jesus saying, "I've come that you might have life and life in abundance," right?
Yes.
And that has nothing to do with possessions and possessions in abundance. And so often when we think about this abundance that's due to us, we think of it as these monetary things because of our proclivity to want to obtain and amass and gain these things. But actually, life and life in abundance speaks to so much more than just money and possessions. And I think it's interesting as well that in a culture where people were perceived to be blessed who had much, Jesus comes as the savior himself and doesn't have much. He comes as the treasure, and he comes born into a manger. He lives an ordinary life as a carpenter. He's not surrounded by these trappings that we've become accustomed to thinking of people who are blessed. And so it almost makes me think of the Beatitudes, right? And the kinds of blessings that it describes and who is blessed. And so it challenges fundamentally this notion around the fact that for us to be blessed, we must have many cars, many houses, many bags, many shoes, many anything really. Because at the heart of it, again, you have this heart, right? Which is said to be deceitful above all things.
Above all things.
And then Judas, my guy, who's kind of holding the title at the moment in terms of the Bible for greed, presented with both treasures. Jesus, the physical treasure here in front of him, and the 30 pieces of silver. And home he goes, with the 30 pieces of silver. And it's for us who don't have a real and tangible and physical Jesus to portray, I think it's so much, we take it for granted that we're not doing what Judas did in saying, even with Jesus, I choose this. Or we don't interrogate with enough rigor what it looks like for us to stand in the same place that Judas stood, confronted with Jesus and 30 pieces of silver, confronted with Jesus and the opportunity to earn 3.5, 6.5, 4 rand, 50, whatever the case is, but to go after the opportunity to surround ourselves with a security we can see, feel, and touch.
Interesting. Sorry if I may, because I'm thinking now, that sounds like a secularized approach to God's intended goal through Jesus, because of it's good that we're touching on the fact that that was how it was during Jesus's time, and I think we see that playing out even today.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking, because of Pastor Sivi's here, doesn't that perhaps speak to the fact that we have quite a lot of pastors that measure their effectiveness in the gospel space by how much money, cars, buildings, everything else. What's normally your view on the, because of I think that's actually something that is interesting, and I wouldn't say they are greedy, but I just your view on that.
Oh, you wouldn't say that.
Yeah, exactly.
I won't ask you what you will say, but just on the record,
it's probably better you say it than me. But yeah, I think in a world where we're assuming that to lead by example means to have the things that others need to have, it becomes unhelpful for pastors.
So good.
because what we are trying to demonstrate then is that this gospel comes with material gain. And because I serve this gospel, look at the material gain. And this can happen for you if you just sow a seed, right? And again, I'm not despising sowing a seed. Go ahead, right? You know what? Let me just...
Don't sow a seed. Don't sow.
Right? No, just...
Oh, goodness.
Can
Can you edit this out, please?
I might need this money, by the way. So yeah, thank you.
Can we just...
But you know what? SARS might see this. Yeah, that's what concerns me.
This is the invisible hand operating right here.
You know what I mean? Whilst then the fundamental issue, Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ.
Sure.
Good.
If what he meant was all out, then okay, cool, then I understand. But if what he meant was faith,
Yeah.
my faith, the way that I lived among you without having to ask you for anything, the way that I lived among you, working with my own hands, the way that I lived among you, not as a busybody, not as someone who's lazy, but somebody who worked hard to serve you. And then also imitating his faith, his work ethic, but also the fact that he is trying his level best to imitate Christ. And so I believe if pastors are leading people to imitate them in anything other than faith, Christ-likeness, a sense of work ethic, and you are trying to create this material view, I think there's a flaw there because we don't see that anywhere.
Yeah.
We don't see that. Peter is busy complaining about SARS in the New Testament. And Jesus is so awesome.
I mean, they weren't even allowed to hang out with people like Mandy, like my tax, my collectors. They were just out here, not even associating with them at all.
Yeah.
He's the best. He's like, oh, okay, just go get a fish. He gets a fish and he's painting a picture to him on mission. By the way, side note, I actually think there is a chance that maybe most of the ability we have to earn is actually us being intentional and living on mission.
Yep.
Sure.
So good.
Going to find our fishes. Whether you're in the business world, whether you're in ministry, go find your fish.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And open the mouth. And then he also says, you see, what's on here? You know, whose face is this?
Yeah.
You know, and give to Caesar what is Caesar's, etc., etc. There's so many other examples. You know, the oil, the expensive oil, and the guys are looking at this thinking, this is too expensive. This is a waste. And in Jesus' economy, this is worship.
Yeah.
And it makes you think how, sorry to use this term, how wasteful is our worship?
Yeah.
Or are we better at budgeting our worship than we are with our own finances?
Yeah.
You know, how extravagant are we in
So
terms
good.
of sacrificing and giving to God? Those are, for me, are the mind benders. The fact that you have pastors showing around cars, that's not a mind bending for me. It's just unfortunate. It's a missed opportunity. You know, it's like those people that Paul says, I see these guys are doing this for financial gain. Let them be. How crazy is that?
Right.
Like, I see what they're doing. They're preaching this gospel so that they can get more money. But you guys, you know, hear this gospel in a different light. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I feel about it.
Is your question answered? Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Finish it off.
It does, because I asked it purposefully because you see a lot of people that started in this route of believing, getting exhausted along the way because they've been trying and they don't look anything like the people they are imitating.
Fair enough.
And the question is, what am I not doing right? They pray 24/7. If ever there's anything of that nature, they've been fasting. And some have lost sight of the right way.
Yeah.
Because some start off with good careers, then they get, because if there's so much desperation spiritually in any human being who does
Yeah.
not know the Lord. And that comes in a manner in which, and I like what Tim Keller said in one of the in the message that I actually got to listen to, that when the rich guy, the rich young man came to Jesus and he was asking him what good thing he can do, then he says, even though he had resources,
Yeah.
there was still a feeling in him that something was still missing,
Absolutely.
because he didn't have the connection with Christ. He did not have a relationship with God, and I think that desire is in all of us, and we try all these things to actually fill that gap that we actually have, that only God can. And if we fill it with the wrong things, we go around and we never get satisfied.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I actually want to ask you a question, if you don't mind, Mandy, here. But I know a little bit of your story, and man, it's such a powerful story.
Sure. Thank you.
Where you came from and where you are. But it made me think of, the amount of people who come from underprivileged backgrounds who feel that sometimes, because of the stuff we just spoke about, that the church has been unhelpful to their plight as poor people who they get to the church, and it's almost like they hit this barrier that almost, if in their minds, is shrinking some kind of ambition, or it goes to the other extreme where it's, to be a Christian, at least a successful one, looks like this. Having come from where you come from, and obviously sharing as comfortable as you do, as you want to, where you are now, it's night and day. How have you managed to become who you are from the background you came from without letting the ambition or the fear of not going back grip you and begin to define destiny and call, and how you get there?
That is a loaded question right there. Wow. And having not been prepared for that, let me try and put that in there. It's a loaded question, because you're touching quite a number of things that I think are very key. Being in the Christian space, I think at times when we don't understand, because there's something key about someone's background that you have not lived through, that you can misinterpret and think you have a quick way out. One, when you see someone who's coming from a disadvantaged background, giving them what you think they lack is not a solution. It's worse when they don't understand that, because I think it's very key for the person who is disadvantaged previously to understand money is not what I need to solve my problem. It is part of the things I need. I needed to get that understanding first. As a child, I didn't know that. It took living through circumstances, because what happens is, again, I think the recipe for greed is coming from a similar background as mine, and say to yourself, I want as much money as possible so that I never go back. Secondly, I want as much money as possible so that the people who's been disrespecting me, because remember,
Hey,
you have no idea. I think the biggest part of poverty is not the fact that I don't have food.
Yeah.
It's the disrespect I feel.
Talk about it.
Me feeling like I have to explain my existence.
And the disrespect that you gave to my mom, to my dad, to my brother, to my sister.
Yeah.
Listen, if I had to go there, because you want to fight for your lineage, you fight for everything that has to do with you. You want to explain to everyone that I could, but I just didn't have what it took to compete with you. Because it's a very interesting thing to want to get out of a situation so bad, but you can't explain. It's not overnight. I think if it was not for God, and I mean, not as a cliche, because that's what a lot of people say. Oh, yeah, if it wasn't for God, I got born again at 13. I'm 40 now. And it took that encounter to ground me. Because all was set for me I'm going to do everything it takes to get out of here.
Yeah.
And I don't know where the line would have been where I'm saying there's right and wrong. Because when you're desperate, you can go all the way.
Oh, so good.
So I mean, in one of the when I was telling my story, I'm not sure how much of. So I had a sister who was a disciplinarian. So just to
shout out to all the disciplinarian sisters.
Yeah. She's late now, but God brought her so that she could serve a purpose. So one time, because of how desperate I was, just to show this aspect of desperation, I think I was 9 years or whatever. So in PE, it takes ranks, I guess, everywhere. So I happened to be in a taxi rank in Jolie. That's where I grew up. Then this guy was like, he's looking for Ukondi, sliding door operator.
This is like an Eastern, an inside
All the guys
Eastern
in the taxis who
takeaway.
open the door.
Stop.
Yeah.
Sliding
I'm not
door operator. Yeah.
For the taxis.
That's the one.
The elderly knew that if you start off that way, you are never going to come right. And for me as a child, I thought this is a quick way to make money. And I'm looking at my situation at home and I'm like, here's a way to start off to solve problems. This guy who's a driver says, hey, listen, I'm looking for this person then. I'm like, okay, great. I'm 9. I get home and I'm like to my sister, I got a job. She's like, what? Then I tell her where I got the job. Did she not smack me?
True to form.
There you go.
But I'm just showing the desperation and what I was willing to do in order for me to get out of the situation I was in. It took God coming in and actually adjusting my lenses, again, in what you're saying, to understand building treasures in heaven, as poor as I was, in a godly manner, in a godly guided manner, without missing the point. And the last thing is, it's when then the Christian circles try to say to you, accept where you're at. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Because the issue that I have, for sure, you then making God look like he is this oppressive person for certain people. And it's okay for me to stay there. Whilst I see you living a life that I wish I could have a fraction of it.
Sure.
And my life would be different than this. Living in a shack where half the shack is, when it rains, water just falls through. 3 days down the line, I know how the smell of the wet carpet smells like. You can't tell me that's where I'm supposed to be. Talking about whether it's God's will or not, it's something that I could do something about. I could go and work, change that. I might not have wanted a mansion. I just wanted a house that was safe for me to stay in. I'm not sure if that answers.
There is so much in this, and we do not have enough time for us to unpack all of it, but there's a couple of things I want to touch on, and then there's a couple of questions I want to throw out. So one of the things you mentioned was around this idea of being respected, or rather being disrespected. A friend of mine, one of my closest friend, always says when she sees our society play out and the just acquisition of assets and enormous cars, enormous houses, and just the muchness of our lives, she always says, my friend, this is a dignity issue. People go after these things because they're looking for something they didn't have. And it is in some of these things that actually they're finding what they didn't have. And yes, it's purchased through money, but actually what you're buying is this idea that now you'll see me differently. Now you'll treat me differently. Now you'll know I'm not the thing you thought I was. Now I won't be invisible anymore, right? Sure. And that comes from the place of one's treasure. Because if the right thing was shaping and defining your identity and your enoughness, you wouldn't feel that a thing that is purchased could close a hole that defines your identity and provides you with a certain type of dignity. And I thought that was really interesting in what you shared and what you said. But with that being said, and the elephant now being in the room, I want to ask you guys about black tax.
Yeah, let's go.
Right?
okay.
Oh, is this the elephant?
I want to get to black tax because in a conversation I was having with a friend recently, we were just discussing the fact that the idea of black tax didn't exist in our parents' generation or the generation before, right? The idea that it was, not that there wasn't an expectation that people should help one another out, or that there should be a transfer of support from one family to another, or that, a child from one cousin could live with another aunt. When did black tax emerge? And what makes it tax in our generation that didn't make it tax in our parents' generation?
Interesting. So, my uncle, my dad's oldest brother, came into a bit of money, not that much, but enough that he was known. He used to go work in Port Elizabeth, one of these like mine. I don't know whether it was a mining thing or steel, whatever. And so he's got, I think, about 9 kids.
Sure.
And one time he came home, and I hope none of my family's watching this because they'll be upset.
Too late now.
And he's still alive. One time he came home, and my late aunt told him that one of the kids was pregnant. He lost it. Lost it with her.
Sure.
Because in his mind, I went and I did what I'm supposed to do. You're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. If they're falling pregnant,
Clearly you
it's their
failed.
watch.
Clearly.
You missed the mark.
Right? Yeah. But what's also happening at the same time is that you've got this culture of black men particularly leaving their rural homes to make an income so they can take care of the greater family. And if we're trying to look at the origins of what we now term black tax, it's hard for me to not think of the great trek to Joburg, whether you're reading Long Walk to Freedom by Madiba, or, the amount of people who came here for the gold so they can take money back home as to keep things going that side. I'm sure it precedes even that, but that's the closest thing in my mind. I don't like the term. Whether we want to change the term, I don't care. But I just don't like the term because the assumption is it's something we don't want to do.
Yeah, go there.
Or it's something that we are bound to have to do because of our previously disadvantaged whatever.
Yeah.
And it gives no opportunity for us to see this as a biblical thing.
You see, go ahead.
Because in my conversations with my black friends and my white friends, and I'm using very generic terms here, and so it might not be right, so forgive.
Yeah.
But in many of our conversations with my white friends, there seems to have been a good articulation of boundaries. When many of my non-white friends have killed themselves over a wedding and over lobola and what, that ensures that they're going to pay that money for at least another 5 years before they can even consider having a bond.
Correct.
Right? So there's this idea of the line.
Yeah.
This murky, interesting line. And then I go to the other side and I go, all right, but I understand the discipline and the idea of the line.
Yeah.
And then I go, but also, supposedly in the scriptures, to take care of your family is arguably a good thing. And so my pushback sometimes to my white friends is, you might be fulfilling budget, but to what end do you fulfill taking care of your family
Yeah.
as a I don't want to say commandment, but as an instruction from the scriptures? And I think there's wisdom and generosity needed on both sides. Thus, I say I don't know if black tax is helpful to the conversation, but then I also know other people on the other side of the scale who their families have put so much pressure on them that it does feel like tax to them. It feels like if you don't give, you have no sense of a gratitude for us and what we've done. So,
Your take?
Yeah, I think taking into account what Steve is saying, which is very true. I think also there's the aspect of the two worlds in which we exist in. I think this is probably coming out as a result of a contrast of the Western world, where I don't think we have the same appreciation for the same values as the black community, because exactly to your point that how we've been raised in a very communal setup where I think at some point the success of a certain person meant the success of the family or of that particular village, to say, because I know villages where in a particular house they would be responsible for schooling the kids in that village.
Yeah. Very true.
So that means whenever then you would make any level of progress in that space, you don't get happy that you are outdoing the guy next door.
Yeah.
But your success is in ensuring that the kids back home also get an opportunity to go to university, which was supposed to be to multiply. So that I think that was then the first. But then over time, because we lost track of some of the reasons why we're doing things, because passing this on from generation to the next also got to lose some credibility to it, because some people just took it on, and then you get to the point where now you're in this world that's both Western as well as, I don't know, it's mixed up with people from villages. Now, when I don't know if using the Western, the word Western is right, but for non-black people, non-black people who don't have these kinds of constraints or these kinds of backgrounds, they would then look at what are the things that are seemingly keeping us broke or poorer than them. When they look, we are in the same positions at work, and they're thinking, but bro, the car you're driving, it would be better if you were driving this car, and I know you're staying in a mansion. There's no mansion and you've got this car. What do you do with the money? I think then the whole black tax story comes in to say, I have other responsibilities than you do. And then also, I think actually ours, it does have, as you're saying, an inspiration of the word to a certain extent, even though we wouldn't pinpoint to say because of it not being cold to those who've raised us, because you have to show a level of gratitude to say, yes, thank you for what you have done. I might not be able to pay you enough, but I can actually extend a helping hand for someone in the very same space that needs the same level of help that I needed before.
And maybe practically there is do you have money every month that is placed for helping?
Right? That's a question.
Could be family, both spiritual and natural, you know what I mean? But I'm reminded when you said this about families. My uncle, the one I told you about, he took my dad to school and some of his brothers. But my dad took some of his children through school.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And that's the vibe.
Absolutely.
Around that environment.
So if I don't read Bible right now, Armand is not going to invite me to come back to the podcast. So I, having heard both of you, want to bring us to Hebrews 10, particularly around this conversation of, do you budget to give, right? Or do you put provision in your lifestyle for generosity? And this question or this notion of an individualism and community, right? Because in the church, we're called to community. And so there is this very interesting interplay between individualism and greed. And so I don't think that there is a coincidence in the fact that the church specifically calls us to community.
Yeah.
And the our identity in the faith in and of itself opposes individualism. I think those things are interesting for me. So here we are at Hebrews 10, 32 to 34, and it says, recall the former days after you were enlightened. You endured a hard struggle with suffering, sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. And you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property was the part that kind of shook me in this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think plundering in this particular translation is a provocative use of the term, but there was a joyful sense of being able to contribute
Sure.
to a communal cause, inspired by the knowledge of the fact that we are in possession of something even greater than what we get to share with others. And I think that's the tension with where is the line, right? Where is the line of just enough for me and generosity? Where is the line of just enough and the line of saying I deserve to have more? Where is the line of mine and others, and how much do I get to keep versus how much should I give away? And I think that's the tension in this conversation, right? Around, I mean, whatever it may be, but the notion that generosity is actually the antidote for greed. And I want to kind of put it to you in terms of your when you arrive at the point of generosity, how does the idea of generosity interplay with the thought or the notion of greed in the context of some of the discussions that we've had and your own personal experiences?
I'll go after you.
Yeah, actually, it's good to bring us back to earth or back to the script so that we remember what it's about. Yeah, no, generosity is definitely the antidote because I think, so one of the things that God says to the Israelites in Deuteronomy is, you must remember that it is God who gives you the ability to create wealth. I think that's that disposition first. It grounds you in how you steward what God entrusts you with, because I think also it helps you in your approach to how I'm supposed to manage these things, because I do know we all want more of anything good, actually. Anything good, we want more of it. And keeping that in mind, that it is God who gives me, whenever then God gets to nudge me to give, because it as again they were joyful. I'm sure this joyful, not the one you get to dance about.
Are you sure?
This is like a joyful in your heart.
Which one is joyful in your heart?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's that one that, you know, it's churchy. We are grateful. We could give.
Why not I got joyful, Jay? Joyful.
I mean, you can't say I'm not joyful. I'm telling you that
I'm joyful.
It is with joy that I get to give you what I'm giving you.
Oh my gosh.
That's it. That's classic.
You know, so but then, and I think it's natural and it's good for me to feel that it's painful to detach. Because I think if it did not cause any pain, then it wouldn't worry me. And that's why I think Jesus saw that the woman with the 2 pennies gave more.
Gave more, right?
Let's go, bro.
Because of it meant something to her. The others took out of their wealth that they had, made no difference in their bank balance.
Good.
So I think it's the same thing then that happens with us, because of to kill greed, I've got to give some of the things. I'm like, not now. Because I've got plans for this. And you're right to say then, I've got to keep checking my heart. How much of it that can I give away? Not to prove a point, because I mean, for sure. And now I'm just thinking, because when Paul writes to the Corinthians, then talking about the aspect of love, he says, without love, it doesn't matter. You can give more. But the motive is not love.
then you are just wasting time. So I don't want to do it because some people do give to prove a point. I had a statement actually at some point where someone says generosity is another form of power. So I could be generous to obtain power.
Absolutely, bro.
So these things then, so if I give in obedience to God, it definitely are healing a certain part of me. Yeah.
Sure.
You know,
So
that thing you said about power is one of the reasons I say no to a lot of financial gifts to me. If I sense that you think you giving me money means somehow you are better than me, it will always be a no. I've done it for years. I don't care. I will not let you use money for you to look down on my family because of what I do. I don't compromise. In fact, I struggle to receive money at all from church
Sim
members.
is actually allergic to money, just in case you didn't
well,
know this.
Listen,
Just in case.
I told you.
no, I struggle to receive
to
money.
compel him to even talk about giving money.
I struggle to receive because of the responsibility and the weight of my role. I'm not even trying to have a poverty mentality. And so it takes a lot for me. I must know you quite well, you know. So I'm cautious about that because of this. But having said that, I want to just add maybe this podcast. I think you've answered this question so well. But I'm interested in also how the oppressive regime and the corrupt regime are both birthed from a spirit of greed. And we can look at apartheid and our current situation, and if we actually put on lenses that are spiritual, I'm willing to bet you we'll find that the same territorial spirit is still at work.
Absolutely.
Still at work.
Absolutely.
And we find ourselves fighting over flesh and blood, but the same territorial. And you know me, I don't speak like that, you know. The same territorial spirit is at work, fundamentally greed, that we can move from this kind of apartheid to the most, what do you call this, unequal nation in the world. And you tell me that's because of our human genius. No, those are some serious Nimrods. Those are some serious other gods at play. And I think the way you collectively fight that is a collective sacrificial generosity that begins to push back against the innate spirit that keeps dictating systems, relationships, work, environment, that there must be the stuff that hurts. And if it hurts too much, reevaluate. And if it never hurts, reevaluate. There must be something in us that gives with an understanding that faith is never divorced from wisdom, and wisdom is never divorced from faith. I don't think those two need to fight. You guys are rich, so let me ask you this.
What's happening, Madilang?
I've been submitting applications for
rich
that.
People, as rich people,
As aspiring rich people.
I'm actually interested to hear this. I know you're about to shut us down, but do you feel that the church in general either is partial to rich people in the church or overtly harsh to rich people in the church?
Ooh, this is such a good question. This is such a good question. So and you can debate me on this. My response is that because of the way that our society is structured and what you've just described, right, is the condition and the territorial powers at play, is that there are very few conditions in our society, inside and outside of the church in general, that are harsh towards rich people.
Really?
That socially, I'm not saying rich people don't have struggles,
Sure.
but I'm saying as social constructs,
Sure.
there are very few things that society designs specifically to be difficult and egregious for rich people. And I think at the heart of it is because of the endemic greed in our society.
Sure.
And because it's so pervasive, it continues in this fashion, right? And so I find it absolutely alarming that we can have this massive debate around VAT, and that VAT can be coming in at 24%, higher than corporate tax, when VAT is actually being paid. I find it interesting, right?
Yeah.
I find it interesting that in a country where we are being carried by 200,000 people, maybe 1 million people max, that we can have difficulty completing a conversation about NHI without getting vexed, right? And I'm not saying, what you're not hearing me say is that the bill is perfect and that the bill is designed in the way that it should go out. But what I am saying is that what I find interesting is that the greatest discomfort to people around NHI is not the idea that there should be universal healthcare, but that universal healthcare should inconvenience me to the point of having to queue at Baragwanath Hospital like those people. That, for me, is the general crisis that we have in our unequal society, that we are willing to picket around the fact that the government is spending a massive bucket of resources on the social wage bill, but we can spend the 350 Rand grant at lunch and not bat an eyelid. And so those are some of the tensions around how our society approaches wealth. It's almost like there's a reverence that goes with it, right?
Sure.
And it's the opposite. It's that attributed respect that you don't get when you're living on the other side of the right side of inequality. So that would be my response. We're desperately in need of closing, but I want you to have your
We can
piece.
always edit afterwards. There's juice here. There's just a little bit of
We're
juice.
desperately in need of closing.
Champion,
I will,
answer as a rich person.
As a rich person, I think Umandis is putting it very well. When it comes to things like influence and quickly getting, rich people incorporated in church activities, sometimes we hardly pay attention to their lifestyle or anything most of the time by virtue of, what they have. But I also think there is also the other side in church still, because remember, church is like this pro bono place where you gain affluence and influence by virtue of your commitment to being there day by day. So then you find those then that seek to be seen as better than the rich because they are more available to do more in church. So I'm gonna vex you on that because
Go ahead.
you must feel
Go
it.
there.
Yeah.
So you could have done better than me in school.
Sure.
Then you're gonna hear statements like education is not everything.
Yeah, sure. And they're telling you, hey, I lead 4 connect groups here. Whether you just attend one.
Exactly to get and they might be saying something that makes sense, but I just think
Hey, please lead a connect. And just
the motive behind. Also, when you say money is not everything, the statement is right, but it's where it's coming from.
sure.
Do you get my point? So if I am not trying to make use of my position so as to lower you because you might have something I don't have,
Come on.
then that's because of, I think then both ends have to look at the heart condition.
Yeah.
Because it's why we do that. So that's what I'm saying. In some place, on one end, everything is lavish or is great for the rich. On the other, it could be.
Define then for me what you mean by rich. Define it in the context of what is rich in our context, given all the stats you've given our nation, given the fact they want to end this podcast. Define rich quick.
It is so difficult in the context of our society because you see now you're forcing me to have a longer response than I ordinarily would want to have. There's no such a thing as the average South African. That doesn't exist. When you have this level of inequality, there is no average South African, right? So the mean means very little. If I add what the highest person who is in this economy earns to what the person at the very bottom earns, and I divide it by 2, there's almost no one in that income. Those people are just not there, right? So our mode is actually where we should be looking, which is where the majority of people are sitting. And so if we go by the data, 45% of the people, 45% of the population is on social income grants. So the data says that the average household income in this country is 149,000 rand, which means technically at 149,000 rand, you're rich per annum. If your household income is 140, you're rich, right? Yeah. So I think for me, it's more of a in the context of our society, it's more of this dignity issue. How well can you live in our society? How much does it cost you to feel like you live well? Because there's also this idea of subjective well-being that we're constantly contending with, right? I only feel like I could be fine, except that I'm comparing myself to the guy that's earning 1 million, right? So relative to him, I'm going through it all, right? But relative to the average household income of 150,000 rand a year, I'm actually fine. And so the subjectivity around well-being is also part of what we need to constantly be unpacking for ourselves to say, what do I benchmark my wellness against when I justify to myself that I'm struggling or I'm doing well? Who do I see that, I mean, the danger with our culture of scrolling is that we constantly keep benchmarking our well-being against external markers and external factors, and those become the pursuits of what we, but it actually has nothing to do with where we are and how much we have and how much is enough for this particular situation.
I am 100% agreeing with that. I have nothing to add.
Look, you have nothing to add. Good, because we are supposed to be closing again.
I was leading the question because I think where I wanted to go with this is, you keep asking what's the solution. Yeah. And quite frankly, dear Every Nation Bryanston, we are a rich bunch of people. Sure. And unless we decide who we want to be as a church, nothing will change.
Mandilake is making Siv cry.
Nothing is going to change.
I agree.
For as long as we keep thinking that the solution is going to come from some big, bright star.
Yeah. Sure.
From the north, from the south.
Yeah.
And we still waiting for hours.
100%.
We are going to miss a responsibility that has been given to a generation.
That's so good, Siv.
To actually turn the tide, because we're the guys.
Yeah.
We're the ones who are rich in this context.
Yep.
You know, we're the ones that James is talking about, that we've got gold and silver rotting in our cupboards.
Not rotting. Oh,
whilst
Lord.
we are still trying to hoard more from those who need. And so it's not to condemn, it's to challenge that.
Absolutely.
Is there a way that we can wake from the stupor? Is there a way that we can rise from the ashes of our own sense of need and actually begin to see what we have?
100%.
And play the game.
And I think Paul's response is so good in 2 Corinthians to that exact challenge. It says, but since you excel in everything, and he's speaking obviously to the church in Corinth, since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, in love, in the love that we kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving.
Jeez.
See that you also excel in this grace of giving. Powerful. And giving is a grace, right? It's a grace because it's not going to ever come naturally to you to want to lean into sacrificial giving. It's not ever going to come naturally to just want to give away things that you actually enjoy having. You're not going to just want to give away money that you've worked hard to earn. It is a grace in which we are challenged to excel. Right? A grace by its nature is described as an unmerited divine assistance, right? It's an unmerited divine assistance. You are not just going to have a grace without divine assistance. Wow. We're going to have to go to God and ask of God for the grace to be able to give, right? So, because to go back to your point around that joyful, that's kind of feeling like it's an uncomfortable joyful. It's a joyful because I know I'm doing the right thing, but there's still something in me that says, I'm not 100% joyful. I'm not dancing around the room. It's because as a grace, it's a virtue that comes from God, right? We need divine assistance for us to be able to have the grace of giving, but more so in this challenge in 2 Corinthians, he says to excel in the grace of giving. I think that's the challenge to us, Siv, as this community that are in this position that we find ourselves in the context of our society. Are we giving? Are we giving as a grace? And are we excelling in the grace of giving?
Sure.
And that for me has been a very, very powerful and provocative scripture in terms of challenging me about how I deploy my resources into my family. And also just in terms of thinking about what it means to give and what it cost us to give. So we're going to close. And we've had a very heavy conversation.
Let's excel in giving. You know what I mean? Let's be practical. Let's not...
Can you put this in the basket on Sunday?
We need a basket.
Can you put this in the basket? Can you put this in the basket at the back on Sunday when we do the poll?
I probably got it from the basket.
Oh my God. Okay, great. We're going to close the way that we closed one of the other podcasts, which is to help people figure out, if they may be struggling with greed. So give us your, you may be struggling with greed if, so that we can kind of land this point and give people a starting point as to where they should be looking.
I like that.
If they're looking. Right. So I'm going to try and start us out because I thought you might need, some help getting warmed up, but we are right at the end. So you may be struggling with greed if you get super uncomfortable when it's time to put the tip in at the end of your bill.
Yeah, but sometimes you may be struggling with greed if you never feel you have enough.
You may be struggling with greed if, though you have, you start feeling not enough when you see someone else's possession.
Covetousness.
Yep. You may be struggling with greed if every time you log into your social media, you have anxiety.
Oh man,
that's a big one.
I don't even have social media. That made me anxious. You may be struggling with greed if you love an unequal system that works for you. Maybe just a little bit.
Tough days.
Ow.
Tough days. Mandila.
You may be struggling with greed if you can't give your wife a money to...
I want a pedicure. What is it? Magic?
I think this is where we close it.
Exactly.
I think this is where we close it.
I'm struggling with greed.
The moral of the story is this. In our own ways, we're all struggling with some level of greed. Find it, identify it, and let's bring it to the Lord so that He can help us to learn to excel in the grace of giving. Thank you so much, everybody.
Come on,
We love
man.
you,
But my
Braxton.
wife's hair is too expensive.